I want to get into Montana. So we've been covering the ballot initiative states on this show. And now we have reached Montana, which is a state that I do not know much about. So here we go. I believe they had 2 ballot measures. This is how ballot initiatives work in Montana. More bounce to the ounce. More bounce to the ounce. My parents used to listen to that. Okay. This is how BIs work in Montana. Citizens of Montana may initiate laws as a state statute and ratify their own constitutional amendments using the citizen ballot initiative process. In Montana, citizens also have the power to repeal legislation via veto referendum and call a constitutional convention by initiative. The Montana state legislature may also place measures on the ballot as legislatively referred constitutional amendments or legislatively referred state statutes. Laws governing how citizens get initiatives and referendums on the ballot in Montana. There's no citizen BIs that made it to the ballot in 2022. In Montana, they have the single subject rule. Montana has a single subject rule for all ballot measures. If you're not familiar with what that means that you can't have 2 different or 3 different subjects as a part of one ballot measure, such as if this, then this. You can't do that there. A little bit about competing initiatives. Montana law does not address competing ballot initiatives except by requiring the Attorney General to notify the Secretary of State about conflicting proposals. Number of signatures. To place an initiated constitutional amendment on the ballot, proponents must collect valid signatures equal to 10% of votes cast for governor in the last gubernatorial general election. Initiate a state statute or veto referendum. Signatures equal to 5% of votes cast for governor in the most recent gubernatorial election are required. Distribution requirements. For a constitutional amendment, proponents must collect signatures equal to 10% of the qualified electors in each of 2/5, that's 40, of the state's 100 legislative districts. Okay, let's get to the measures. More bounce to the ounce. Now it's stuck in my head. Jesus. The only thing I know about Montana is that there was a movie I saw a long time ago called Legends of the Fall. And that's all I know about Montana. I know that it looks very beautiful. They filmed that movie in Montana, and that's it. That's all I know. Okay. Here's the first one. Montana C-48 search warrant for electronic data amendment. Yikes. A yes vote supported amending the state's constitution to require a search warrant to access electronic data or electronic communications. This measure passed by 82.32%. That's probably the highest one I've seen so far in reference to the passage rate. The C-48 added language to the Montana Constitution that requires a search warrant to access electronic data or electronic communications. The amendment also states that electronic data and electronic communications would be secure from unreasonable searches and seizures. Well. Who supported this measure? State Senators Bogner and Ellsworth and State Representative Daniel Zonikoff. Organizations that supported it: Americans for Prosperity Montana, Frontier Institute, Libertas Institute. And here is one of the arguments from Jason Ellsworth. SB 203 updates our outdated laws that have not yet caught up with the realities of the 21st century. We've already required a warrant to access cell phone location data, a warrant to access electronic devices, and a warrant to access digital communications in state law. Senate Bill 203 would make those protections even more substantial by asking voters to insert them into the Montana Constitution rather just in law. Pat says, way to go, Montana. Inspiration from unexpected places. There was someone earlier. They were wondering what the winds were going to be for Montana. Okay. Arguments against it. Mark Murphy said the association opposed the amendment because it would produce unintended consequences, especially with regards to investigating internet crimes against children. He said, what I see in this change is a fairly large opportunity for unintended consequences. That's interesting. I didn't think about that. There was no campaign finance money spent on this measure to support or oppose it. Roger put in a little bit of commentary here where he says, what the hell happened between the 2014 case where it was a unanimous decision against the government and then the 2018 case where Thomas and Alito said, nah, I'm going to rock with the government on this one. That's in reference to a search warrant for electronic data. This case right here, Carpenter versus the United States. In this case, the Supreme Court ruled in a 5-4 decision that law enforcement must obtain a warrant to access cell phone tracking data. Chief Justice John Roberts authored the opinion for the majority and said the government's acquisition of the cell site records was a search within the meaning of the Fourth Amendment, and the government must generally obtain a warrant supported by probable cause. Justice Anthony Kennedy dissented from court's opinion and judgment, and he was joined by Clarence Thomas and Sam Alito. Kennedy argued that the court's ruling puts needed, reasonable, accepted, lawful, and congressionally authorized criminal investigations at serious risk in serious cases. Often when law enforcement seeks to prevent the threat of violent crimes, and it places undue restrictions on the lawful and necessary enforcement powers exercised not only by the federal government, but also by law enforcement in every state and locality throughout the nation. That's interesting. I did not know about that case. Did not know about that. Okay, and the other measure, Montana LR 131 medical care requirements for born alive infants measure. A yes vote supported this ballot measure to state that infants born alive at any stage of development are legal persons. Require medical care to be provided to infants born alive after an induced labor, a C-section, attempted abortion, or another method, and establish a $50,000 fine and or 20 years in prison as the maximum penalty for violating the law. This measure did not pass. It failed by 52.55%. Let's see. It says it defined born alive as the complete expulsion or extraction of the mother of a human infant at any stage of development, who after expulsion or extraction breathes and has a beating heart or has a definite movement of voluntary muscles, regardless of whether the umbilical cord has been cut and regardless of whether the expulsion or extraction occurs as a result of natural or induced labor, C-section, induced abortion, or another method. At the time of the election, Montana law stated that a person commits an offense if they purposely, knowingly, or negligently cause the death of a premature infant born alive. Interesting, the negligently part. If the infant is viable, the maximum punishment for negligent homicide was time in prison not to exceed 20 years and a fine not to exceed $50,000. Damn. Brutal. Okay. Unfortunately, I can't read Roger's commentary. It's blurry for some reason. Yeah, I can't read that for some reason. It's hard to read. But for this one, it did fail. Maybe I can try to. Maybe a little bit. Okay. Roger said, strange how after they passed it in both chambers, that they decided to put it to the voters to sign through their votes using the legislative referred state statute rather than sending it to their Republican governor who would not have vetoed it, which I would have understood if they had a Democrat governor. Meanwhile, they did the exact opposite in 2018 when they did have a Democrat governor, sending it to him for signature where he vetoed it. Either way, the voters didn't want it. One of the great things about ballot initiatives is this is direct democracy, putting it in the hands of the voters. I wish every state in this country was a BI state. We could get a lot more things passed. We've passed a lot here in Massachusetts with BIs. So it's not easy. They're not easy. They do cost money and labor. But when it works, it works. What's that, A. Ross? That sounded like a good way to criminalize actual miscarriages, psychotic shit. Yeah, that's why I was like, this is pretty strict, you know? Interesting.